Hello, and welcome to the Saga of the Clone Saga, aka the Clone Zone, a podcast where we, the students of S.H.I.E.L.D., read through the infamous 1990s Clone Saga and apparently shit that happens after it. I'm Billy.
I'm Mike, and Billy, welcome back.
Yeah, thanks.
And I'm Vincent, and our sponsor this week is Naked Juice. It's non-GMO, it's healthy for you, and it's very expensive, but I didn't pay for this.
Who did? Did Dynamite pay for it?
No, it's very refreshing. Thank you, Naked, for sponsoring. And next episode they sponsor, we'll get naked.
That's how we get flagged.
That's how we get views. So, as Billy said, this is after the Clone Saga, as we've sort of been. I think this is actually, well, we did one episode officially, actually after the Clone Saga so far. And this is the Gathering of Five, which we're kind of only reading half of the story in this episode because the full story is really long. And it's deceptively really related to the Clone Saga. But we don't get a ton of that here. Sort of. We'll see.
Hoping when Vince makes the title for this episode, he just puts like the subtitle is "This is the episode where nothing happens."
So we still have the 4 main Spider-Man books, and this is a back to crossovers between them. So we start in Sensational Spider-Man 32. A weird cover. We have Norman Osborn, who I'm pretty sure. Well, the last major time we saw him in a kind of villainous role would be our last episode. But we've already discussed his status quo. He half owns the Daily Bugle at this point, so he's in the books. But this is a weird cover. He's like holding some like Yu-Gi-Oh shit. He's got some artifacts that are sparkling. And in this issue, and in fact, we read 2 sensational issues today. Neither of them are drawn by Mike Wieringo, which is very unfortunate.
Good.
Well, that too. But we still have Todd DeZago writing it, and the artist here is Joe Bennett, who is currently drawing Immortal Hulk, as we have said. And we get introduced to this organization with their weird, creepy building, and they're the Techno Chamber, which they masquerade as a financial institution. And I don't know how like an insurance or investing company gets away with the name Techno Chamber. But of course, they are a secret cult, which uses like stupid magic terminology. And it's not really clear what the hell their deal is because they're just kind of introduced.
Vince, I think you're mistaken. They're not the Techno Chamber. They're the Technomancer Agency.
Oh, it's Technomancer?
Yeah.
All right, well, I can't read.
Which is even more absurd than what you said. So
we get introduced to Hamilton Cromwell, who I thought was going to be a presence in the story, but he's not really. He's this guy who works for Technomancer, and there's this ritual called the Gathering of Five, and there are these 5 artifacts. It's 4 like puzzle pieces and then a centerpiece, and if you gather them together, you can do some crazy shit. Norman Osborn, he kind of claims he has 4 of the pieces, but we learn later he literally just has 1, but like he strongly knows where most of the others are. And the 5th one is being held by Technomancer here. Meanwhile, Spidey stops an ATM stick up and then allows the victim to beat the shit out of the robber. I don't know the morality of that right there.
Our hero.
while MJ, she's working on a psychology paper because as we recall from last episode, both of them are back in school. But she gets called up by a modeling agent that she used to work with, who asks her how the baby is. And this is the thing where, like, I haven't read that much post Clone Saga, and so I just had a complete misunderstanding about this era, that the Clone Saga and the baby were just never referenced. But every issue we've read, which granted we're reading issues that are like tangentially connected to the Clone Saga, like every issue they reference the missing baby. And what really the coolest part of this issue is the fact that Blade, starring Wesley Snipes, is playing in theaters. And it's a classic movie.
That raises so many questions, though.
What does that mean?
What?
Like, I know they break the fourth wall a good bit, but if Blade exists as a movie, is it based off of real Blade? Or is Blade somehow no longer real?
No, it's based off of real Blade. The Marvel Comics exists in the Marvel Comics universe and publishes stories of the real superheroes. So,
okay,
like,
I'm not familiar with this.
Yeah, so Stan Lee
is one of those motherfuckers that always try to be ice skating uphill.
Yeah, so Stan Lee is sitting there writing Spider-Man stories. Which, but even if you think about it really hard, it gets really confusing because of all secret identity stuff.
Oh.
Like, in the Marvel universe, they can't be publishing comic books starring Spider-Man which show that he's Peter Parker, obviously, because that wouldn't make any damn sense. So I would say in the Marvel universe, Marvel comics are probably terrible.
It's okay. At this point in time in the real universe, they were terrible.
Well, yeah,
so.
But you can't do really any personal drama. That actually just blew my mind. That's really weird. But yeah, but hypothetically, I mean, Blade exists in the Marvel universe, even though he's not like a huge superhero, like name recognition wise. But I guess Wesley Snipes was like, yo, that weird British black dude who kills vampires, really cool. I read about him in the newspaper. I want to make a movie and star as him.
But I don't want to wear that green costume, is what he said.
Yeah. And then we get introduced to Override, and he has a dumb costume which looks pretty similar to Avalanche from the Brotherhood of Mutants.
Yep. He looks like Green Avalanche.
Yeah. His powers, I'm honestly, I'm not 100% clear if it's his powers or if it's part of his suit. Because, well, he uses it out of his suit at certain points.
Yeah, okay. It seems like later he has like weird robot hands, so I don't know. It's kind of confusing.
He can jam electronic or mechanical equipment. So if you're driving in your car and he's next to you, he can jam up your engine and you'll crash. Or if you're watching TV, he can shut off. Well, not whatever he does, the TV would turn off. So he breaks into Techno. What is this called?
Technomancer.
And he murders the guards. Well, he doesn't. He jams up the guards' guns and then makes them murder each other, which I don't understand how that works. Because
you see, they were both trying to shoot him, but their guns were jammed. So naturally, they aimed their guns at each other to investigate the jamming, and then.
So I guess they did pull the trigger, and he like jammed it while the trigger was pulled. Because if he just jammed their guns before they pulled the trigger, then did he make them pull the trigger on each other? Or did they accidentally shoot themselves? This didn't really fully match up.
His powers don't completely make sense.
Yeah. But they're kind of like, they don't make sense, but they're slightly cool.
Yeah.
Like, this is a good, like, C tier villain. Based on power set, at least. And on that note, not just power set, he has some motivation and backstory. Something is wrong with his wife, she's in a coma, and he blames it on Spider-Man. And I don't think eventually we get more of that backstory, but I don't think we get the full explanation of Spider-Man's involvement in it. But he and his wife have been introduced before. This is referencing other stuff. And so Spidey tries to stop Override, and Override jams up his web shooters and just makes him blow his load everywhere, which is pretty funny. And then I guess Technomancer also has giant monsters in their basement. And the one that Override decides to break out is pretty ridiculous design. It's basically a giant chicken with tentacle arms. It's pretty creepy. But Override gets away, and now Norman has all the pieces, except he totally doesn't. But he's like, oh, I got it, but we have to get all the other ones. And Override is like, hey, my wife is really fucked up. Can I be part of the gathering of 5? And Norman says yes. I'm not sure if he actually ends up being one of the 5. We will see next episode. And then the end of this issue, again, maybe we'll see more of this next episode because it doesn't come up in the next 4 issues. Scryer shows up to talk to Norman, and Kane is mentioned quickly. But I'm pretty sure Kane is not in the next arc. But we will see. And we also get mention of Alison Mongrain, the woman who stole the baby. And she's met by Robbie Robertson in Paris to protect her or something. And now moving into part 2, we have Amazing Spider-Man 440. This is probably the best cover out of the bunch on this episode. It's not a great cover.
Yeah, that's sad because it's not really a good cover.
But it's Molten Man, and it's drawn by Mike Wieringo, who does this cover, but no interiors on this episode. The creative team here is Tom DeFalco, and we have Raphael, pronunciation Kayanan, maybe? And he's a Filipino artist, and apparently also a martial arts master, I have learned. And he did some Firestorm, Captain Atom. Then in the 90s, he did some Conan and Turok, and ended up on this issue at some point.
I was really hoping you were going to lead into. And today I met him at a bar.
I'm sure he's in the Philippines. I have no idea what he's doing. So then we open with Molten Man on a rampage, and we quickly learn he's probably under control. And we don't get an explanation for how he's under control in this story.
We never do. It's just a mystery.
I also would like to say that I fell asleep reading this issue.
Really? I feel like this issue, the fact that it focused more on Molten Man, so it was actually less connected to the plot, which I guess could either be a really good thing or a really bad thing, depending on how you're looking at it.
I think what happened is the first issue already tired me, and this was just the issue where I just finally broke.
Yeah. But as a reminder, Molten Man, Mark Raxton, is currently a good guy, sort of. He is involved in running Norman Industry or Oscorp in some manner. He was basically in charge of things alongside the Liz Allen, Harry Osborn's widow. But I guess Norman came back and just kept him on. But he's on a rampage, and he runs into a certain building and sets off the sprinkler system. And I thought this was kind of interesting. The sprinklers, as the water hits him, it turns into scalding steam. And so Spidey has to get all the people out of the building before they start getting burns from the steam. And there's a quick, weird reference where Spidey comes close to saying truth, justice, and the American way and makes a copyright comment. And I'm not certain if there's a joke there. I don't think DC ever tried to copyright that phrase with regards to Superman. I quickly tried to look that up, and I don't think it's a thing. And I'm not sure that Marvel is necessarily one to be digging at other companies for copyright because, of course, Marvel are literally the masters of stealing copyrights, and defunct names and trademarks and stuff like that. Obviously, you have Captain Marvel as a major example. Even a lot of characters that you would only think of as kind of trademark thefts, if you really dig deep. Daredevil, Marvel just stole that name technically. Basically all of the characters. Doctor Strange is not the first Doctor Strange. Some other company had that a character with that name, and various others. And then we've talked once or twice. There was the lawsuit against Jim Shooter's Defiant Comics, where there was the whole Plasma versus Warriors of Plasm thing. And then, of course, for a long while, Marvel and DC jointly owned the copyright to the word superhero. So not really the best position to be making jokes about other people being greedy with copyright. And on the topic of Captain Marvel, so we talked about how Blade is playing in theaters. In comic books, you always got to pay attention to the signs in the backgrounds because they're almost always weird intentional references. And there's a sign in this issue that says "Raboy," and it's either absolutely nothing or it's Kianan weirdly tributing who I assume is an influence, maybe Mac Raboy, who was the signature artist of Captain Marvel Jr. in the Golden Age. But it's probably just nothing. But go check out some Mac Raboy art. It's pretty great. So Norman got the one piece. I think did he start out this story with actually no pieces?
No, I think he had like the key middle piece.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. He has the centerpiece, but we never see it. So then he gets Override gets the first one stolen from Technomancer. And then the second one, he just goes and buys from a pawn shop. And this pawn shop owner, his name's like Maxwell, he just kind of becomes a hanger-on for the entire rest of the story. Just for Norman to like have someone to bounce dialogue off of. And we're slowly getting more explanation of what this ritual is. So there are 5 pieces, 5 people have to undergo in the ritual, and each person gets some kind of prize. And so you can either have power, knowledge, immortality, and then the 2 are negative. So you have a 3/5 chance of coming out in a positive way. You can also die or go mad. And so which one will Norman Osborn get? Maybe all 5.
Die.
He's definitely not going to die. And then Spidey follows Raxton into the sewers. And for a half a second, like when I read the first page, I'm like, all right, I'm going to be mad because I'm going to have to nitpick because they're going to ignore the fact that they just explained about the scalding steam and Spidey's just going to go through the sewers fine. But they acknowledge that. Actually, Peter Parker is just really slow and didn't think that through. So he's like, oh shit, I'm going to fucking die or pass out with all this hot steam. I'm not going to be able to track him properly. So he has to quickly get out of the sewers right after he goes in. But the closest manhole is covered by a truck. And he's like, well, fuck. But wait, I have the proportional strength of a spider. And you could have definitely done it, conveyed it better with the art, like in a more cool way. But I thought this was a fun feat where he lifts the truck from under the manhole. And they also show in the art that the truck is full of boxes, just to double the effort. But I thought it was a cool scene. And he's out of the sewers, but he still has to find Molten Man. So he steals a map from a newsstand. Mm-hmm. Because, as we know, Spider-Man is a thief. He doesn't pay for things. Also, I'll note that this newsstand is carrying comic books. And I'm not certain that newsstands were carrying Marvel books by 1998, because this is like post-crash, post-Marvel bankruptcy. They may have had some Archie stuff. That's about it. And then there's a badass splash page of Molten Man catching Robbie and Allison at the docks. And Molten Man's one line in this entire story is him yelling his name. And I don't understand this because it's his one line.
Yeah, I actually didn't even realize this was a dialogue box until you just pointed it out.
It should be, maybe it's a lettering error, like maybe Robbie's supposed to be yelling it or some shit, but it doesn't make sense. So like he's under mind control and silent, but he's able to yell his code name when he jumps into action. It's pretty dumb. And it's implied that like Robbie knows who Allison Mongreen is, that she works for Norman Osborn and everything. And so I'm curious, does he know about the whole baby mess? And do we? I don't know what's going on with the baby.
Got eaten and cloned.
Yeah, I'm very interested to see if that is addressed more at all, like the actual results. There's also a quick reference. Peter Parker jokes about having blue eyes, but he totally doesn't. So I think it's just a shitty joke. And Allison runs off. She needs to find Peter Parker. And Robbie's just awkward. He's like, he's right there. It's Spider-Man. But it's not played so obviously that it's like definitive that Robbie knows he's Spider-Man. So Robbie's just like, well, I'll follow you. And I think the whole 5 things, power, knowledge, and mortality, that's explained at the very end of this issue. And now we move into the third part, Peter Parker, Spider-Man 96. Remember, at the very end of the Clone Saga, they tacked on Peter Parker to the title of this book.
Well, wait, I just want to say that my favorite scene of this issue, we didn't cover it, but it's Norman on the phone with Scryer, and Scryer's just at a payphone. So I'm just imagining Scryer on some New York street, just on a payphone with Norman Osborn.
Oh yeah, yeah. It is explained at the very end that Norman is somehow controlling Molten Man. And also at the end of this issue, Molten Man ends up in the water and possibly chopped up by the rotors on a big ship, but there's no conclusion. So Molten Man's just MIA and probably doesn't pop up again in this story. In fact, I'm not sure if we'll see Molten Man again in the entire podcast.
Probably won't.
So pour one out for the home. So Peter Parker, Spider-Man 96. On the cover, we have Madam Web. So things are ramping up.
Yay?
Yes.
I forgot Madam Web was a character until this.
It's because her popularity is tied to the 90s cartoon.
Yeah,
and I think this is like one of the maybe 3 comics I've ever read where Madam Web has popped up.
I don't really like her as a character because
not that great.
It's not consistent, like what the fuck she is and what she's for. Like sometimes she's just this totally, like I'm pretty sure in her original appearance, she's just this totally random, like sidekick person who doesn't really have, like she has a dumb Madam Web thing in the costume, but she doesn't really have like an innate strong connection to Spider-Man.
Isn't Julia Carpenter the Madam Web now?
Yeah, but eventually as you go on, she becomes like this tied up with all this shitty lore and like the whole spider totem crap.
Yeah, that's why.
Yeah.
And so this issue, written by Howard Mackey, who's been writing this series forever, and it's drawn by Norman Felchley. He's the guest artist here, and I had no idea who he was. I had to look him up, and he doesn't have a ton of credits. He's kind of obscure. His major things are he did a indie series which started out as slave labor Graphics, which was the name of a now defunct publisher, and eventually DC published it, and it was called The Griffin, and it was written by Dan Vado, who again is a very obscure name that no one knows nowadays. But Dan Vado wrote some Justice League in an era when Wonder Woman was the leader of the team in the early '90s. Norman Felchley, also with Dan Vado, drew the miniseries Star Corps, which is like some weird '90s Superman spinoff. I think maybe involving Cyborg Superman. I'm not even sure.
Star Lab?
Before the
Is that who it involved?
what?
It involved Star Labs and Emil Hamilton.
Yeah, I imagine so. But yeah, Norman Felchley. What did you guys think of Norman Felchley, the guest artist?
It was bad.
Yeah, I mean it's not. I honestly don't think any of the art in this story is awful. It's just like totally boring, like substandard '90s.
These are pretty blocky. I mean, we'll get into Luke Ross's art in the next issue because Luke Ross's art is really bad, in my opinion, in the next issue.
Yeah, and going back, I wasn't impressed by Raphael Kinyanin at all either. Who that was his first time on popping up on this podcast. So not great art, not great writing, but we power on. And my big question is, where the hell is John Romita Jr., who has been the frequent artist on this book for a long time? And my guess is maybe he's getting a head start on the relaunch, which is around the corner and which we will briefly dip into. But I'm not sure. He might be on the next issue of this series for next episode. And while we're going through credits, I just want to point out again that Gregory Wright is coloring this book. And again, coloring's not that great either. But Gregory Wright is the writer of Deathlock and Silver Sable, which we referenced before, the rare writer-colorist. But others have done that. And the most recent person trying to attempt that is Jordi Belair, who is trying to evolve into a writer-colorist now with Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So check out that book.
Who got Buffy?
I think it's IDW.
IDW?
Or it's Boom. I'm not sure. It's not Dark Horse, and it's not Dynamite. That's all I know.
Should have made a play on that Buffy license.
What?
Should have made a play on that Buffy license.
And this issue opens with an old school kind of opening splash page where it really has nothing to do with what happens in the book. And it's really confusing because you have Norman Osborn and the Green Goblin on this page. And we get a reference to something that we missed between episodes. At some point, Nitro tried to kill Norman Osborn. And Nitro would be a super obscure villain, except for he has miraculously made like 2 humongous contributions to the history of the Marvel Universe.
Yes.
He gave Captain Marvel cancer, which led to his death. And then he blew up in Connecticut, killing most of the New Warriors and leading to the Civil War.
One of those things he did was actually great for the Marvel Universe.
The first one.
I think both.
Killing the New Warriors was a commendable, almost a medal awarding act.
I agree. He's a real hero.
Okay, but the best New Warrior survived.
That's true, and he became it's true. The best New Warrior, Nova, survived, and through that we got to have Annihilation Conquest, and all that stuff. So I do agree.
That's not who I was talking about, because Nova wasn't there at all. I'm talking about Speedball, who survived.
Nope.
No.
Yeah, he became a much cooler character called Penance.
No.
Cooler? I think just as bad, if not worse. Penance is awful, and so is Speedball.
I'm reading through like Annihilation and Conquest. The first 3 issues of Nova, where he shows back up on Earth and he meets Speedball, and he's like, "Oh my God, what the hell happened to you?" You're too messed up. I'm leaving the planet again. See ya. Bye.
Peter Parker is working late at the Bugle, and again, this first page, I was like, "What the hell is a freelance photographer doing working late on a computer?" I don't understand that.
He's doing homework.
Yeah, but Jonah lets him borrow the computer to do his homework because his hard drive crashed. And then MJ shows up to the Bugle, and I thought she shows up with food, and like I don't know why she didn't sit there and eat with him. She just like showed up. They had like a maybe 3-minute conversation, and then she left him food. Which I mean, that's a very nice thing for her to do, but it seemed a little weird.
She's cheating on him.
Yeah, and she's talking about getting back into modeling, which we've talked about before. And as soon as she leaves, Norman just appears behind Peter Parker's shoulder, just creeping on him. And then I kind of love this scene where Norman's like, "Yeah, I too considered a career in writing," because Norman spent his youth on H.G. Wells novels and comic books. And so he tells Peter Parker this impromptu horror story about like some anthrax chemical attack kind of thing. And then we finally get Madam Web in this book. She's barely alive thanks to this crazy tentacle life support system. And I'm not really sure when she last showed up. I didn't feel that it was necessary to look up because I don't like Madam Web. And through weird precognition telepathy, she talks with Norman, which is somehow like at the same time that Norman is at the Bugle. And Norman is like, "Well, you're dying. I can give you immortality with this stupid Gathering of Five thing." And Madam Web is like, "Oh, I want to be hot again." So now we know what young, hot Madam Web looks like. And
I think the Madam Web we see is perfectly hot.
yeah,
I mean that gray hair and those tubes. Mm.
And Madam Web is blind, I believe. That's my understanding, at least.
Yes.
And there's this weird moment in her like precognition version of the dream where she's fully restored. And I think it's just the shitty art, but it totally looks like she's like filling up her breasts to check that she's like young again.
No, I'm looking at the panel. That's exactly what she's doing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what's drawn at least. And then Pete goes to thank Jonah for letting him borrow the computer. I guess he finished his homework. And Jonah's like, "Oh, there's this fucking chemical attack somewhere." And Norman's like, "We're not going to report on that story." And Jonah just gets entirely cucked because Norman's like, "Think about your family." And so I think this is like a somewhat interesting scenario where all Pete and Jonah are both just trapped because of how much influence Norman has over them and his current public image. So Pete is just like, "God damn it." He basically throws a temper tantrum and runs off in his costume. And Norman, of course, at this point, totally knows that he's Spider-Man. He did not get amnesia again between the story arcs. And then Pete, there's some weird stuff while Pete's angry. He runs across these guys mugging a scrawny dude who wears glasses, and he beats them up. And it's like this whole thing where it's like, that used to be Peter Parker.
He doesn't even beat them up. He just falls on them.
Yeah.
And he like does it because he loses control of himself. So he just crashes into them with a lot of force. So he probably just murdered them.
And Madam Web uses her giant floating telepathy head to contact him. And they try to be funny with it, where she's like, "No, I need you now." And it's like, this is so awkward. And Jonah, he's so frustrated after getting cucked that he pulls a gun out and he's going to try and go shoot Norman Osborn and kill him. And then the thing that came out of nowhere, obviously we've been dealing with Override, and Norman was using Molten Man in some way. Then this no-name villain, which I guess is maybe called the Creep, tries to kill Allison Mongrain, but Robbie saves her. And he's just on like this one page.
No, I am 100% sure that we have seen Creep before in this podcast. Because I remember this name, because I remember thinking of how fucking stupid it is. I know we've seen him.
I don't think we've seen him, but based on the name and like the weird stuff, I think he's just a really shitty ripoff of the Creeper, who's a villain. But I'm assuming he was in a previous story arc, though I'm not sure we saw it.
A villain?
Yeah, I'm saying the Creeper's not, but the Creep is.
Oh, okay.
And Spidey gets the puzzle piece for Madam Web, and we totally don't see any of it. And I didn't understand this part at all. Like, it's implied that he has to go do something, and he's even questioning, like, ooh, do I get to beat some people up because I'm throwing my temper tantrum? But then the next page, he just has it and hands it over to her. And there's a clunky mention of Thor. And Thor right now, earlier we had mentioned how Thor, like all the other dead Avengers, was in the Heroes Reborn universe, but didn't have his own book. Thor now has his own book again. In fact, it might be launching around this time, which may explain the reference. And Thor is being written by Dan Jurgens, who was back at Marvel after storming out during the Clone Saga. And Spidey, he hears about Jonah about to shoot Norman from Madam Web, so he runs to go save Norman Osborn, but he runs into a dragon breathing green fire, which just allows for a shitty Godzilla 98 joke.
Yep.
And again, Marvel Comics used to publish Godzilla. And Godzilla is a character in the Marvel Universe. So they could have just used Godzilla and made the direct joke where it's like, oh, your movie sucked.
Thanks, TriStar Entertainment.
Yep. But so Jonah pulls the gun on Norman, but he pussies out. And Spidey sort of saves him, but I don't think Norman was going to shoot him at all. And Jonah is just like a idiot. He's like, no, fuck you for saving me. And Jonah's just
like, what?
He's just a crazy man. And at the end of this issue, we get Madam Web. So Madam Web like fully volunteers to be part of the Gathering of Five. So now we have Norman, Madam Web, and Override. We have 3 of the 5. And Madam Web, after saying, yeah, I'll do this, she, with her weird future seeing powers, she sees Norman's ultimate plan, which is to use a genetic bomb, whatever that means, to kill like almost everyone on Earth. And who knows the fuck why? I don't get this at all. I guess because he's evil. Now, part 4, Spectacular Spider-Man 262. I think this is the worst cover of this story. And it's the worst cover only partly due to falsely crediting Howard Mackie and Norman Felchley.
Yeah.
The creative team from last issue. I'm not sure how they fucked that up. The real team in here.
Is it because it's supposed to be a surprise that it's John Byrne being the guest writer?
Well, you just wouldn't put the credits. You wouldn't lie about them.
Yeah, because like it doesn't make sense to have Felchley's name on the front because Luke Ross is the penciler and he's not a guest penciler for this issue.
So the team is Byrne and Luke Ross. So John Byrne writing Spider-Man. Byrne, way back, drew a run on Marvel Team Up, which of course was a Spider-Man book with Chris Claremont. But now someone let John Byrne write Spider-Man.
Well, I was going to say, like our last guest, John Byrne, not known for much in the comic book industry, kind of a one-hit wonder, if you will.
Yeah.
This is the only issue he's ever written.
But in all seriousness, he does not do a good Spider-Man.
No, he's not a good Spider-Man writer.
He has some weird hang-ups and misunderstandings about the character.
I mean, there's some writers just aren't going to be hits on every character. John Byrne, I just joked that like he didn't do anything. Of course, if you're any fan of comics, you know John Byrne is great. With his runs on X-Men with Claremont and Fantastic Four, but yeah, and then Superman. But like his Spider-Man has never been great. Even in the issues where he shows up in X-Men, he wasn't great.
So the last arc in Spectacular before this was Goblins at the Gate, which was, I've referenced it a few times. It was Roger Stern trying to fix some of the Hobgoblin legacy crap, but he would need another thing to fix that anyways. And before that was the occasionally mentioned Identity Crisis storyline, which I have a prop for here. And J.M. DeMatteis was still one of the writers during Identity Crisis. And just while I'm at it, the other trade from this era is another crossover, Spider Hunt, where Peter Parker has a bounty on his head, which leads directly into Identity Crisis. I would say the best comic book storyline called Identity Crisis.
Well, we'll find that out when Crisis Cast comes back, and in 4 years we eventually get to Identity Crisis.
Yep. And the whole so this issue actually is the one where nothing happens. Yeah. John Byrne, big deal. John Byrne guest writer, and nothing happens in this issue. It doesn't really advance.
So what's the point?
I don't know. So the weird framing device here is that there are some dumb, self-important cyclists that are chasing Spidey around the city. They watch him stop a robbery, and the owner of the bodega thinks that Spider-Man's Captain America somehow. I'm not sure how, if he said even if he said Thor, I would slightly understand. But Captain America, literally his costume uses the American flag. I don't know how you mistake Spider-Man for Captain America if you pay the least attention to superhero happenings in the city where you live.
Well, it's also it's great that you mentioned the word framing, because we're going to talk. This is going on my tangent on Luke Ross's art here, where everything is framed horribly, proportionally. Just he has his POV shots are just completely awful, and they don't sync up well at all proportionally to anything in the issue. Luke Ross has been a kind of hit or miss guy in these episodes, but this is one of his worst issues in a long time.
Yep. And so the cyclists just keep following Spidey through the city. Meanwhile, MJ, she is getting a modeling contract, or she's getting offers for modeling, and she walks into this agency, and everyone's obsessed with her. They're like, "Oh, wow, you're older and you had a baby," sort of. They don't know the details, but it's like, "Wow, you still look good." And her possible contract, she's compared to a few supermodel names. We have Elle, Cindy, Naomi, and Christy. And I think I could probably connect the last name on 2 of those.
Cindy Crawford, Christy Brinkley. What's the first name?
Naomi
Campbell.
Elle.
Ooh. That's the one I don't know.
It's definitely not Elle Fanning.
No, she's not born
yet. Yep. But whatever this offer is, I guess it's a really huge number. But I feel like that's slightly downplayed as we go into the next issue. This issue really hypes up that MJ is about to become the biggest model in the world. And then that's a little toned down.
It's Elle McPherson.
Okay. And then we have another moment where Spidey, he stops to teach some kids not to bully while playing basketball. And I don't really like this scene. I don't think it works.
I don't think so either. He kind of just beats the shit out of this one kid. He
Yeah.
slams him into a wall, and I'm like, that's kind of aggressive just to teach them not to steal a ball from smaller kids.
Yeah, he does it in a kind of spiteful way. What he should have done is just shown up and be like, I have an announcement to make. Stop bullying.
Shut the fuck up.
And then the framing device closes with these cyclists, because they were so focused on following Spider-Man, they cause a giant car pileup and then try and flee from the scene. And Spidey stops them and then really passive aggressively turns them into the police. And I don't like this whole framing device came off really weird to me. It's like it was like it's very clear that John Byrne is trying to say something about like self-important people or something, or like following the law. I'm not sure what, but it comes off really strange. And the not a framing device, but this issue opened and then ended with Norman Osborn calling and waiting on someone named Franklin or something. And I have no idea who the fuck that's supposed to be.
It's Franklin Richards.
Yeah.
I may have skipped one or two caption boxes, but I don't think it's explained. And in the end of this issue, it's like a big surprise where it's not who Norman is expecting. And in the beginning, there's something where it's like, I guess this Franklin character, whoever he is, his son is like, Dad, you're a pussy. And so maybe the son takes the place of the person who's supposed to play this role. I don't know. And it's not addressed in the next issue. But in the next issue, Sensational Spider-Man 33. So we have 4 Spider-Man books. This is the 5th part of the story. So we have 2 issues of Sensational in this arc. And this is the final issue of Sensational Spider-Man. So bye-bye to this book. We saw it start during the Clone Saga, and now we see it end. And the creative team here is Todd DeZago and Joe Bennett, just like last time.
The funny thing is 33 issues is more than what any Marvel book today gets.
Yeah, most of them, yeah.
By a substantial amount.
Yeah. And I don't, at least based on my notes, not a ton happens in this issue either. So this story arc totally could have been like 3 issues.
Yep.
And of course,
it's been 1, honestly.
Yeah, and of course, this is only half of the true story arc anyway. So Override, he's chilling with his comatose wife, and he almost considers killing her.
No, he goes to take her off life support.
Well, yeah.
He takes control of the life support to turn it off, and then she wakes up right as he does it. And he's like, "Oh shit!"
His hand is on, glowing with his powers, and he wakes up. And he's like, "Oh shit!"
And meanwhile, Jerry Springer is playing on the TV in the background. And his wife wakes up, and she's like, "I'm fucking miserable." And she kind of wants him to pull the cords. And so this becomes like this weird, like, assisted suicide subplot.
Mm-hmm.
Then we catch up with the Parkers, and their roof is leaking water. And it's getting a bunch of photos wet, including old Spider-Man photos and old modeling photos.
Okay, but of all the things that could be leaking, I think water is probably one of the better ones.
Yeah. I mean, you never know. It's New York City in the Marvel Universe. And what's super awkward is we get a footnote in this issue explaining who J. Jonah Jameson is. Because if you're hopping into the 5th part of an epic Spider-Man story, which is referencing back to a story arc from like 2 years ago, you know, if you don't know who Jonah Jameson is, you need to know. It would have been better at least if they like referenced his first appearance. Like if it was like J. Jonah Jameson, see his origin in issue 3. And then you're supposed to go, you know, hunt down the back issue. And I wasn't, because in the last issue, I wasn't clear if MJ signs the contract, the modeling contract, because she has the contract and the woman is like, all you need to do is sign it. And MJ's like, wow, that's a big number. But it's, I guess, implied that she hasn't yet. And she wants to do modeling. She's decided, but she won't tell Pete that that's what she wants to do because she thinks he'll judge her for dropping out of school or something. And it's written as them having an unhealthy relationship, which is really stupid, but it makes sense given some of the upcoming status quo changes. I'll spoil it a little bit, even though we'll see it on an episode. MJ is presumed to die in a plane crash
Right.
in a few episodes.
And then she doesn't come back until JMS.
Yeah. And so Spidey, he stops Override from robbing a bank and turns him into the police. And Spidey's like, hey, police, he's going to escape if you don't pay attention. And then he just escapes and goes back for the money.
They're like, hey, you don't know what you're talking about, Spider-Man. And then, shit happens exactly as Spider-Man is trying to warn them. Because these two cops are just randomly assholes.
But basically, those 5 pages are entirely useless. That's what it ultimately comes down to. And then there's some weird scene of Override's wife talking to Norman, making some kind of deal with him, but he already has a deal with Override, which is supposed to help her. It's dumb. But Norman is going to pull her plug or something if things don't work out. And at the end of this issue, MJ finally tells Pete about the modeling after he spends a shitload of money buying her textbooks after she dropped out of school. And he supports her. Surprise. They're just bad at communication.
And also, she's going to make a lot of money anyway, so yeah, you can really support that.
And that's it. That's where the issue and the story arc ends. There's not remotely any conclusion to a story arc, which is called The Gathering of 5, which is what's promised on the covers.
Hey, the conclusion is that Peter and MJ fuck at the end.
Well, yeah, The Gathering of 5. But next part, in the next episode, we will finish things for real. And the story arc will be called The Final Chapter, because all of the Spider-Man books are going to get canceled because Spider-Man is failing. He's a terrible character and he doesn't sell comic books.
I agree.
And it's, it's something that's happened to this day. Spider-Man continues not to sell comic books.
Yep. So tune in next episode for the end of Spider-Man, never to be published again. Thanks for watching this one. Bye-bye.
Have a happy Thanksgiving.
Yes, that too.